It's like the perfect.
All right. The Hangout is now live. It's like the perfect crime.
Yes. I thought it
Hello,
was funny
everyone.
the episode got a name from a Probst quote, which is
Oh yeah.
yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
I didn't take note of the title this time. What was it?
It's like the perfect crime.
Oh, okay.
That's the
Well, there
episode
you go.
title. Yeah, which was what Probst said at Tribal Council. It's like the perfect crime. And I don't remember the rest of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I feel like that's, I don't know. Given that we know what happens now, I don't know that I think that's a good title for this episode. But anyway, hello, everybody.
You can do it. Yeah, hello.
I'm Christiana Ellis, and this is Mike Mateen. I'm all off kilter now. This is Talking About Survivor. We're going to talk about Survivor Ghost Island episode 10. Although I would guess most of you watching this at this point know most of that already. But yeah, as far as like what would the perfect crime in this context be? Because I think the A plot of this episode is Desiree trying to make a move to come out from being under the radar and overplays her hand. Like, she makes a valiant effort and then tries really hard at damage control, but is just not able to quite recover from having trusted the wrong person.
Right. I was going to say, it's almost like, I mean, is overplayed her hand really the correct
description? Her reach exceeded her grasp.
Right. Did Laurel burn her? You know,
well, yeah, but I mean, that is what happened. That is how her plan failed, is that Laurel burned her. But I guess I'm thinking of it specifically in the Desiree context, but certainly we don't want to ignore Laurel's agency in making that decision, right? Because that was her own move, right?
Exactly. And so that's what I think, you know, as we discuss it, I think it's important to look at it not just from what happened, but what could have happened. And, you know, did Desiree actually make a huge mistake? Or was this a calculated risk that made sense that Laurel just blew up? And that's why I brought that up when you said, like, she overplayed her hand. Like, I'm not sure she did. I mean, yes, the result was that she overplayed what she was trying to do.
Yeah.
But from her, you know, hindsight is 20/20. From looking forward, I felt like this made a lot of sense for all of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like Desiree did anything that was, you know, it just happened to be the way that Laurel took it and who she took it to and the reaction of them that spun this all out of control, which again is part of why you have to play the game this way. But I don't begrudge Desiree for making this attempt at this point, especially based on what we've seen from the last couple episodes. This is not like something she just came up with out of the blue. She has been trying to put a stamp on something.
Yeah, no, I don't. If I came across as acting like I thought Desiree just blew it here, that's not what I really meant. What I meant was she took a risk and it didn't work out. You know, like the example that you gave, I think is it's interesting because it's almost exactly what I wrote in my notes about Angela at Ghost Island and her game, this idea of she took a 2 out of 3 shot and it didn't go her way. So the question that she says, like, did I make a bad decision? And I'm thinking, no, it was a good decision with a calculated risk, but you just can't control everything. The odds were good and you weighed the chances and decided to take the risk, but sometimes it still doesn't go your way. And I feel like what Desiree did, it's kind of the same thing, is that she looked at the situation, decided that what she wanted, evaluated the risk and said, I think that this will work the way that I hope. And if it does, that'll work out great. But there's always a possibility that it won't. And in this case, it didn't. And so it doesn't mean it was a bad move if you want to evaluate it just on the basis of results. Well, it It blew up in her face. So
Right.
by results, you could say it was a bad decision, but it was not a stupid decision.
Right. And well, and here's part of the reason, like, why I wanted to introduce this dialogue in this episode, because for me, I see this in a couple of ways. Yeah, I already obviously laid down the initial fact that I don't feel like it was a poor decision to try to make this move. Now, and I can disagree. I happen to disagree with Laurel thinking that her best move was then to go blow this up. I don't agree that that was her best move. Now, granted, she survived, but I don't think that long term that was best for her. However, after all of those things happened, I also do not feel like Desiree handled the damage control in a very good way and did exacerbate this problem and tried to dig in on something she really shouldn't have dug in on. And an apology, an explanation. I mean, I don't know if that would have been better. It just, the way she did do it, trying to because it wasn't like she did true damage control. It's almost like she tried to do damage control while still also wanting what she wanted to have happen. And that sort of, like she was still trying to control where they were going, and not seeing what was happening as everybody aligned against her. And so her damage control was sort of kind of on the straw man. She didn't handle that very well.
Well, I mean, I could see that, but in some ways I kind of felt about that the same way that I felt about the overall plan, which was when she realized what Laurel had done. First of all, there was a little bit of a hesitation of not wanting to quite believe that that's what actually happened. And so that's what led to the initial confrontation, right? And so maybe she got more emotional there than she should have. But I think the original decision, which was to say to Dom and Wendell, no, that's not true. She's lying to you. I don't think that's necessarily a bad strategy. It's just that everybody really dug in. And even at tribal council, they were saying they weren't sure who was telling the truth.
True.
So just because they eventually came down on opposing Desiree, and because we know that technically she was lying, she was the one lying, so they were right in that assessment of her, but I don't think that necessarily means that it was a bad thing to try, because she really did try to push to have the target be Dom or Wendell. And then once that came out, she was not pushing for that anymore once she realized that the numbers she needed were not actually on her side. What she was trying to do there is go back to Naviti Strong, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. So I don't know.
Well, it's definitely this whole thing of when you judge a decision as a mistake or not, you say, well, there's any calculated risk has a chance of failure. And we can say it did fail this time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the risk of failure was so high and obvious from the beginning that she shouldn't have tried it. It's just that it didn't actually work out with this group of people and this particular execution. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was anything wrong with the plan itself. It's just you can't always know for sure.
Yeah. And, I think I might as well just introduce this to the conversation, because it's obviously part of how we view this show, is that I think part of my criticism of her is, I lose you here?
You broke up just a little bit there. You're back now.
No, but part of the fun of the show and part of how we view the show is, through this social dynamics and this interpretation. And I've been sort of tuned to this, past mistakes things, because there have been a number as the NFL draft has come out, as the NCAA Final Four finished up, and there were people who kind of get thrust into the spotlight, these young kids. people are starting to go and expose, like, this is now like the first generation of these kids who are entering into their public professional life while having Twitter, which is much more public than like Facebook, because there's obviously the generation before Facebook existed but it was all, and they had issues there too with bad photos, all that kind of stuff. But Twitter is so much more public, and there's just some really dumb stuff on some of these kids' Twitters. And what they end up doing is once those things start getting published, they're going and just deleting their Twitter feed. And as opposed to just saying, yeah, I wrote that when I was 15. I was an idiot. Those are not my views now. I thought it was funny. It's not funny. And here's how I plan to like go. And I'm going to remove those offending things that I said, but I'm going to maintain my online presence. And like, I feel like somebody should be advising them to that. And you even see it, there was a MSNBC host who had some about an old blog, Joy Reid. And it's like, as opposed to saying that, oh, that has all been fabricated, as opposed to saying, yeah, I wrote some dumb stuff 15 years ago, and those aren't my views now. And there was a different time, and I thought I was trying to be funny in a different context, and it clearly isn't funny now. And I would never write that now, and I'm sorry. And it's like, so I sort of like, I've been watching that stuff and seeing like, that would diffuse a lot of this stuff. And then I watch what happened here in this show, and it kind of felt like a microcosm of that. It's like, okay, you tried something that in the context of what you were doing wasn't a big deal. And then when it blew up in your face, as opposed to just being like, yeah, sorry, you guys are really strong. And so I floated that idea, and it was the wrong thing to do, but let's get back to, what we were planning on doing. Obviously people are going to be floating ideas. This is one I floated. That's how I kind of saw it through that lens. So you are probably right in the actual context of the game. I just thought I'd introduce because it's just something that's been on my mind that this actually like brought front and center to me.
Right. I mean, I think one of the challenges, not to make this a whole conversation about the whole Twitter thing, that
as a state of mind.
Part of I think the challenge there too is that it's one thing. Not all of these people are necessarily good communicators, and so therefore the idea of having, giving them a canned apology to read and then saying, okay, now you just use Twitter as normal, is probably not going to be effective either. It's one thing if they are genuinely sincere, but I think there's probably a lot of cases where it's not so much that they are genuinely sincere and recognize that it was a bad thing. It's more that like, shoot, everybody's mad at me now for these jokes that I made, and my manager says I have to fix it.
Right. And so you're right. It's more complex than that. And I think more of where I see, because from my world, is they should be having better managers. Like their managers should be smarter. And the problem is, with this particular thing, just to kind of wrap up that particular one, is that the people who are helping them manage their social media presence are older and not as in tune with how this works. And so you don't have that, like so you have the younger kid who's just sort of thought he can put whatever he felt like, whatever thought or joke or whatever, or sometimes their friends log in just like on Facebook and post things for them that says, something offensive, but then their manager is not advising him. And that's, so a lot of the stuff, I try to follow some people who are very good at how you manage this as an athlete or a public profile person. And if they had a better manager, they could do that, not with just a canned apology, but somebody who helped them say, look, you're about to step into the world at 18, making millions. We get what you've done here. Here's how you handle it. And yes, we're going to have to help you kind of learn how to do that going forward if you want to be successful, because you can turn that from a liability into an asset. And they're not getting that advice right now. And that's, so that's sort of separate from what we're talking about here, but that is a thing that I have concerns about. But
well, so to bring it back to Desiree though, and I mean, we'll go through the whole episode, but I feel like it would be one approach to try to just sort of apologize and hope it blows over. But this is there's a limited amount of time that she has to play here, and she needs to be trying to build a resume for the end game is her goal, right? So an apology that keeps her around one more time, but puts her not only back in the situation she was before she had made a move at all, but now even less trusted by the people she is dependent on. I feel like her attempt was to say, not only should you continue to trust me just as much, but you should also now distrust the person who tried to screw me over. And that's what she was going for. And ultimately it didn't work, but it doesn't mean that the plan was bad. Especially since the alternative was to say, okay, maybe she exaggerated it a little bit. I was just floating hypotheticals, but now this alliance that I'm already on the bottom of, and I'm worried that I don't have any moves to put on my Survivor resume. Now I'm going to have to retreat to trying to be under the radar again, only now with extra suspicion on me. I mean, I don't think that works either. Well, I mean, it maybe keeps her around 3 more days, but it doesn't necessarily give her anything to work with.
Or to the view that I had with it is that you go back to that status quo for this particular vote or the next 3 votes, to your point, but you've now established yourself as someone who is willing to make that move on, because at some point, whether it's Laurel or Donovan, I mean, somebody else is going to want to flip that power structure. They're going to know, rather than, I would think of it as like, rather than just you're untrustworthy, it's, hey, you're open to making this move, because you're never going to, like, from her perspective, she's never going to go to the end with Wendell and, Dominic.
Well, so no, but
if they don't trust her because she identified them as power players and thought it might make sense to make a move on them, that makes her open and advantageous for others to then come and approach her when it becomes time. So I agree with what you're saying. I don't necessarily think that it has to go that way and that you just become untrustworthy as part of the alliance.
Well, it means they're going to try to take her out, which is what happened.
Only because they were definitely untrustworthy of her, as opposed to her saying, like, no, I was just.
So her admitting that she plotted against them and saying, but sorry, I won't do it again, except she doesn't want to not do it again. She does want to do it again. So the only beneficial situation, the only win condition for her is if they do believe her.
No, I mean, that's a fair argument. Okay.
I mean, obviously it's one of these things where it's like, but it didn't work. So in theory, any approach that would have led to her not getting voted out this time would be superior in that sense, at least, right? Because she can't win at all now that she's eliminated. But it becomes, again, that question of the calculated risk. Angela decided to gamble her vote in that Ghost Island game because there was a 2 out of 3 chance, and she figured those were good odds. But she was unlucky, and she chose the one that didn't have it. So doesn't mean that it was a bad decision, except, of course, that it lost her vote. So you could argue, if you're going just by results, it was a bad decision.
True.
But it's a bad decision only by things she couldn't have known in advance.
Right. She was unlucky that she's playing on a season where they've created this entire artifice that is ridiculous and not really that interesting.
Yeah.
And
it was not her bad decision.
It was the producer's bad decision to make Ghost Island a thing that really isn't that ending.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that's great about the concept that is just completely undercut by making it not only random, but also, less likely. It's if you feel like some of the prizes are too powerful and you can't have a new one of those entering the game every single week, okay, have some of the prizes be smaller. Like this week, it turns out, what's the prize? Well, instead of an immunity idol, it's a sandwich. That's still more interesting than nothing.
Yes. But I know we've dug into this thing ad nauseum, and it just this was further a reminder that it can really be stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least better when they get to play versus not even getting to play, because at least there's a decision being made at that point. They have to think about it. But anyway, if we jump back to the beginning of the episode, we have Dom's weird dream where he tells Laurel that he dreamed about having breakfast with her and Martin Sheen, who was her dad in the dream, which is just such an oddly specific detail that sounds like it's just like, why Martin Sheen? That's just so weird. It's just such it's not like he's even super in the public consciousness right now. It's like
where I was getting I thought the connection was coming from like Apocalypse Now, like the sort of the survival.
Yeah. In the jungle.
The heart of darkness. Like you're going, as you go farther down into the jungle, because that's where I was reading that he was taking it, is like as they progress further in this journey, it's like him going deeper into the jungle in Apocalypse Now.
That's interesting. I wonder that's a possible connection I had not considered. It's still weird.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not weird. But that felt like to me the best explanation as to why it was less random than it originally seemed.
Well, that's a speculative connection, though. It might still just be random. Or it might be some other entirely different connection, like they were talking about West Wing or something.
Or she keeps saying winning and we don't know, and he,
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
And that just suddenly makes me think of that line from the Goonies where his mouth is looking at the coins and he's saying, Lincoln, Martin Sheen. It's like, that's John F. Kennedy, you idiot. Well, he played Kennedy once. Anyway, we have just the discussion of everybody being hungry, and they talk about like their fantasy breakfast foods. And Laurel talks a little bit about having known what it's like to be hungry, having been homeless at some time in her past. And then here's where we have that, the initial Desiree kind of making her move. So she's talking to Jonathan, Jenna, and Laurel. And incidentally, especially because I kind of made a point of having not be able to tell the difference between Kellen and Jenna last week, I mentioned that. I paid special attention, and they definitely do look different, but they are also both, blonde, skinny white girls about the same height.
Yes.
So
that is accurate, but they do look different.
Yes. Well, certainly if they're sitting next to each other, you can say, yes, they clearly have different facial structures, but until you kind of learn this one is Jenna and this one is Kellen, remembering which is my point. Yes. Anyway. But this is where Desiree talks to them about saying, feeling like, well, my concern here is that I'm in this Navidi alliance, but I think I'm maybe on the bottom of it, and I would like to make a move. We want to target Kellen first, and then Wendell and Dom. She thinks she can maybe pull in Chelsea. And it's interesting, actually, too, just to think about, because we're armchair survivoring her plan here, because one of the interesting dynamics in this episode, I thought, was how sure Kellen was that there's no way that Desiree would betray her. Kellen thought me and Desiree and Chelsea are like this perfect trio. And so it's interesting that at least in Desiree's mind, she thought she could pull in Chelsea for a vote against Kellen, which maybe meant that Desiree felt that she was closer to Chelsea than either of them were to Kellen. That might have been was her perception, at least.
Yes, that's what it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah. But Laurel talks to the camera about feeling caught in the middle because she's, gotten, close with, Dom and Wendell to an extent too. And that's where we left things before going to the reward challenge. The reward challenge was, fine. It was, there's some interesting stuff in it, but I don't have anything particular for the notes during the challenge.
Yeah, I mean,
Jonathan had to sit out. Tide pulling Dom's boat away from the platform. That just the challenge of you're paddling the boat up, and then someone has to get out, so there's only one person left to keep the boat in place there. And it was a pretty big boat for one person to try to keep in one place.
Yes.
But in any event, Orange took an early lead and succeeded. There's a brief complication with the puzzle that there's extra pieces, I guess, which seems honestly like something that could have been apparent much earlier in the challenge if people were paying attention to just the, like the number of squares that would constitute this puzzle, right?
Right.
Like if it's going to be, 3 by 5 or however many it was, you could kind of just count and see. But I suppose that in the thick of things, it's probably hard to discover that.
Right. Well, yeah, because you're going to go into it making the assumption that you have the right amount of pieces.
Right. Yeah. But we definitely, both sides noticed fairly quickly that, like, hey, how come there's 2 different pieces that say outwit or something like that? But in any event, Orange wins. They choose to have the rocks be the selection for Ghost Island, which is, again, it's like we talked about that whole mechanic and why they chose to have it be that mechanic. There's a reason for it, except that it's just less interesting than almost any other way to do it.
Yeah, I have to feel like they thought there would be more unanimous votes. But the fact that Ghost Island is kind of dumb, there's no reason to unanimously vote anybody there because there's not really like a great reason to go.
Well, right, like
cool, but maybe you lose your vote, or maybe nothing happens.
Because strategically, it's kind of a wash. Because on the one hand, you're away from group discussion, which can be a negative, but on the other hand, you can possibly get an advantage. And so, but at the same time, like I don't know, just it's a tricky situation. It's difficult to know exactly what would be the better way to do that. But the rocks are not terribly interesting. But Angela ends up going. And then we have Michael talk about knowing that he's obviously a target. And so he's definitely interested in stirring the pot. Let's see. We have on the reward, my only note was that they toasted sandwiches, and I was amused by that. They all made their sandwiches, and they're holding their sandwich. So instead of toasting with their drinks, they booped their sandwiches together.
Yeah, that was funny.
So on this reward, we have Michael trying to pitch something to Kellen, Chelsea, Jenna, and Sebastian, and basically, getting nowhere. Like they weren't rude about it, but they were just kind of very non-committal of like, well, you never know.
Right.
Yeah.
He knew that's what he had to do, and he also read the situation. It's not like he left with like, oh yeah, they're definitely on board with me.
Yeah. Yeah, he recognized it's like, well, I had to try, but they're not
open. I've got to figure out something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah. Or winning the challenge if possible. I mean, we know that didn't work out, but yeah. But he knew in any event that he didn't have a plan there yet. My printer is doing a thing where it keeps making noises at me. It's kind of annoying. But let's see. Where were we? at Ghost Island, Angela gets to play the game. We talked about that already. It was 2 out of 3. I think she made the right call in deciding to play, even if it obviously didn't work out. And I think that, it's just a little microcosm of what we were just talking about in the whole episode. Just this idea of, you make these calculated risks. You have to play proactively in order to win. But sometimes what that means is that you make a plan and it doesn't work out.
Right.
I would rather people try to make moves, even if they don't work out, than get to the end by just never doing anything.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Let's see. So Laurel, coming back from the challenge, has concluded now, okay, well, I've made my decision that I don't trust Desiree. And so instead of going with her, what I'm going to do is choose the other side and tell Dom what she said. And it's interesting, actually, just that because it became this whole big referendum on who's telling the truth and who's lying, it's kind of interesting that it was so clear cut from our perspective, in the sense that we knew exactly who was lying and who was telling the truth. And it wasn't ambiguous at all. It's not like they were both kind of lying. It's like, no, Laurel was telling the exact truth and Desiree was lying completely. Yeah. I mean, that was Desiree's chosen path and she stayed committed to it. I think, if you go halfway down that path, you can't really back up at that point.
No. Right. And that's, we've litigated that point.
Yeah.
And here's the part where Kellen is just like, there's no way.
Yeah. And I thought that added a lot of drama to the episode, actually, because I think it would have been far more obvious that everything had just completely imploded for Desiree, if not for the idea that this interesting possibility that Laurel might get labeled the liar despite being the one telling the truth, just because Kellen was so insistent on her mistaken belief that Desiree would never plot against her. You are muted, so I don't know if you're got something else going on in the room there.
Oh, no, I was just talking to my dog.
Okay, yeah.
I told you I was muted.
Yeah, well, it puts on the little symbol. I could also see your mouth moving.
Be the other way that you could tell.
Yeah. Those of you just listening to the podcast version, this is the kind of detail that you miss out. Anyway, we have. I thought it was really just interesting, the possibility, though, that Laurel would be labeled the liar, even though she was unambiguously not lying. I don't think it was a good look for Kellen, though, for her to be like, obviously she eventually voted against Desiree, but for her to be so convinced and so steadfast for so long when we knew that she was completely mistaken.
Yes.
But she was super sure. And I think maybe part of what complicated that is the idea that Laurel told the truth as she knew it, which was that Desiree said she could probably get Chelsea. But we don't really know that Chelsea was ever on board with this, because Chelsea was with Kellen on the reward.
Yeah, except Chelsea voted with Des.
Did she?
Yeah, they were the two Michael votes.
Okay, I didn't pull up the wiki to show the actual votes this time. That's interesting. I didn't realize. So I guess maybe she was then with them, and I didn't fully get that because we didn't really hear much from Chelsea in this episode.
Yeah.
But so I guess the complicating factor there was partly just that Kellen was saying, I just spent all afternoon on this reward with Chelsea. Like, I don't think that she's secretly planning to betray me. But this is where we have Michael deciding to go idol hunting again and ending up with Donathan as the unwanted sidekick, who ends up finding it himself.
Yes. That was really fun.
Yeah. And I like the element of it being one half of the super idol from that season and needing the other half to make it a full idol. And I like the idea of having it be hidden under the shelter. And I'm not sure liking it is quite the right word, but the fact that Donathan kind of ended up needing like 5 other people to help him get it.
Yes.
Meaning that they all know about it and he does not get to have it be a secret.
Yes. And so as we've gone on through this season, I've forgiven some of the missteps on the changes in the idols, because the majority of them have now been, the change has made sense. Like it's like, it didn't make sense to like have it become another super idol. Like,
right.
So, you know, there, like I said, there was, I think you pointed out one kind of an egregious misstep, but
there was one,
have made sense.
A couple of weeks ago, what it was is they had a really interesting one where they said something that was not a real idol has grown in power and now it is a real idol, and that made perfect sense. But then they had one that was a real idol originally, and then they still said it grew in power to be exactly the same power level that it was before.
Right.
They just used the same verbiage when it didn't make sense, and having both of those in the same episode was what made it a little bit glaring.
Right. That's what it was. But yeah,
this one made.
I'll forgive it, because this is the concept of how they've been good.
Yeah. This idea that their power was broken, but they can perhaps be recovered. And so it's an interesting wrinkle to have Donathan with an idol at this point. And I kind of like Donathan. I mean, I think we haven't really seen him be super active in the strategy recently. But, I mean, he's been in kind of a tough spot, right? He's basically recognizing at this point that because there's this whole Navidi Malolo thing, his safest approach right now is to just try to stay out of the crosshairs and hope that there's drama elsewhere. Right. But eventually we need players to step up and do something proactive in order to be interesting at the end. Let's see.
Yeah.
I agree. I also just enjoyed the reminder of Ty's betrayal from that previous season.
That was a good clip.
Yeah.
But like you said, I like that Donathan, because he's enthusiastic about the game. He's just like, I love the segments that I'm still remembering the segments of when he performed well in the immunity challenge or the reward challenge or whatever the challenge that he did well in. He's super proud of himself, and like just everything about his journey is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that he has an idol, because while you're right, he's staying out of the crosshairs. And that's another thing, going back to like Dez's decision, is that at some point, if you keep letting people get picked off, like there become not enough Malolos or, left to flip anything.
Yeah.
And so there's people on the Navidi who are just going to have to coast through that and just deal when they come through, because they're not going to be able to make that decision. So again, going back to Dez probably picked a good time to make this call from a foresight, obviously in hindsight, not so good.
Yeah.
But the fact that Donathan has the idol gives me a little more confidence that he might be able to make it through whatever this is, and then be able to kind of play end game, which I'm excited for. So
yeah, I am too. So we have that brings us up to the immunity challenge.
Yep.
Oh wait, no. Well, okay, so I guess that is where we're at. Now it's just I think it was Laurel and then Michael and Jenna that ended up sitting around with him while he got it at the shelter.
Yes.
Um, so they know he has it at least.
It's
That
also
takes us.
very clear though that it is his idol. Like,
Yeah.
not there's no dispute like, oh, just like both of us most, like there's none of that. It's his idol.
Mm-hmm. Right. Um, so the immunity challenge for it's the interesting thing about this one, I think, because they've done this one before, but as Probst kind of points out, it lasted a long time the last time, and in this one, in less than 2 minutes, we lose more than half. 7 out of 11 go out in under 2 minutes. I wonder if it was just more windy or something than the last time they did it. Maybe I wonder if that was the difference.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Or if they changed the rope lengths or
Yeah, just some element of it.
yeah,
But
the
yeah.
small. Yeah, we I mean he didn't really go into any reason why it would have been so.
It seemed like he was the editing and his commentary made it sound like part of what might have happened is just cascading of one person goes out and then people can't help but kind of try to look and see who it was or something like that. And then when they're distracted, they lose it on their own. That might have been part of it.
Yeah, but you would have thought that would have existed the first time through.
Yeah, in theory. Yeah, I don't know.
A little more disciplined because they're not on social media.
But in any event, we get with the final two of Sebastian and Chelsea, and we get to see Sebastian recover a number of times. He seems like he was pretty good at that, but ultimately it drops and Chelsea wins. And Probst observes that that's the third woman in a row to win immunity, which is not especially meaningful necessarily. It's just kind of coincidence, but interesting.
Yeah, it's cool enough.
Yeah. So as we finish out with the immunity challenge, we have a clip of Dom worried that the goats are getting together. And that's just basically he is confirming what Desiree suspected, which was, yeah, they were at the bottom of that alliance. And that's how he described it too. So, but I noted at this time that it seemed weird to be done with the immunity challenge at only 34 minutes into the hour. It seemed early. It's not like crazy early, but there was a lot of stuff that happened afterwards, after the challenge.
I mean, I think they've been regularly trying to go into tribal council at like 45 minutes. They've been having extended tribal councils.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I think it was just that this post immunity challenge pre tribal council segment was longer than usual.
Right. Yeah. But not ridiculously long. I mean, it's 10
minutes. I don't usually make a note of what the time is. It just felt early to me, and that's why I looked at the clock. But in any event, this is where we have the whole blow up because Desiree finds out. Well, so first we start with Kellen thinking Dom is paranoid for believing Laurel's story in the first place. And she's initially even more worried about that than about any of the rest of this consideration. But so she, goes to Desiree and Chelsea and says, this isn't true, right? And they say, of course it's not. But now Desiree is furious with Laurel for blowing up her plan. So she confronts her and that gets emotional. And now it just becomes this referendum of who's lying. And I think that the mistake that Desiree made there that led to the others was not realizing that it wasn't an accident. Not realizing at first. She figured it out. But I think when she initially went to talk to Laurel about it, it seemed like she thought you let it slip by accident as opposed to you deliberately undermined me.
Right.
because she went and started that discussion like it was a, why didn't you talk to me before telling Dom that that's what we were going to do? You know, that sort of thing. And it took her a while to realize that, like, oh no, Laurel made a choice to go against me very deliberately. So she is my enemy, not a frustrating ally.
Right.
And I think that maybe is that uncertainty is what kind of forced her into that path. But it seemed, I was pretty sure that it was going to be Desiree to go, though, even at the point where Laurel went to talk to Dom and Desiree kind of followed her up there and then said her piece and then walked away again. And Dom just kind of turns to Laurel and saying, Des is acting pretty erratic, huh? And I was like, well, I mean, A, yes, she is. But B, that seems like that's definitive at that point. I didn't think, I wasn't really thinking it was going to be anyone else after that. And in fact, the way that the sneaky ordering of the reading of the votes made it initially, like, I was really surprised when it made it seem at first like it was going to be Michael. And I'm like, what? How did that happen? I was so sure.
Yeah, they've gotten wise to their own tricks, and
Yeah, they're sneaky.
Those of that have watched it for X number of seasons, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're right. Until then, I was on the same page. It was so obvious that it was going to be her, and I think that's part of, again, why why we had that discussion earlier about, was her damage control done correctly or incorrectly, because it just seemed like for the last 20 minutes of the episode, like, we knew it was going to be her.
Yeah.
She wasn't handling it properly. And the interesting part, I guess, is that, again, we're watching it in hindsight because of TV and the way they've edited it. Yeah. And so we know that's what's happened. Yeah.
But we also have the confessionals, even going right into tribal council, where Dom is saying, I'm still not sure who it is that's lying.
I feel like he was pretty sure.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, he made that decision. I think, too, the fact that he approached Michael, like, he had no reason to involve Michael at all if the plan was still Michael.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know. I suppose it's still a smart play, like, because you never know if Michael might turn out to have another idol or something like that. I mean, he almost did, if Jonathan hadn't found it first. Yep. But
that wasn't what his strategy was. Like, we could tell that Dom was like,
he was saying, well, okay, look, it was going to be you, I'll be honest, but things are shifting.
We've got another problem right now.
Yeah.
And you can stick around for a week if you help us.
Yeah. And then I think the only thing that was at any question at all is that even at this point, before going to tribal council, we had Kellen still seeming like she's really not sure what's happening. And also this idea of, like, I think it's dumb that we're talking about voting out any of the Navidi people instead of getting out Michael. And we see her put her foot down to Dom and kind of like insist, like, no, it should be Michael. I insist. And the fact that it didn't end up being Michael is like, oh, I wonder, like, what's the additional ramifications or wrinkles related to that,
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think what Kellen does from now on is going to be really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's lost one of her strongest partners in Des, who, was obviously going to flip on her, but she is gone.
Right.
She tried to make a stand and say that Michael was the biggest threat. We need to get rid of him, which is probably accurate. I mean, well, to say that Des wasn't, like, stirring some stuff up, but Michael is,
he's got a real shot of winning at this point, I think.
Real shot of winning.
Yeah.
If he can maneuver a couple of votes here and there and kind of stay out of the crosshairs, or other people kind of flare up or win some immunity. Yeah.
He has had a strong game already. He has plenty of things he could point to on his resume, and he is also really good at expressing those things. We've seen that in Tribal Council so far. It's kind of amazing for how young he is. I think if he gets to the end, he wins. I mean,
and
obviously failing
while doing all of these things.
Yeah.
Like, no one is like, let's get rid of Michael because we don't like him.
Right.
They're like, we really like Michael, but man, he's really good at this game. We should probably
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I think honestly, people should be talking about getting out Michael, but I think maybe the flaw there is people are saying, well, since we're all agreed that we want to get out Michael, we could do it at any time. But we've also seen seasons past where that's the approach, and then you run out of time, and you are not able to get them out the way you intended. Like you say, oh, well, we can do it the next time. We can do it the next time. And then he wins a couple of challenges in a row, and you realize, oh, shoot, we ran out. It's too late now. But so Tribal Council started with kind of Laurel telling her side and Donathan backing it up, and her seeming very lucid and very rational and explaining an easy to follow and understand argument. And then Desiree basically standing her ground, but it's just not going well. Like it's obviously she knew that it was trouble, but she was just committed, and she knew that like admitting it at that point wouldn't save her. Her only hope was that maybe some people believed her enough that they would vote with her. Or even if they didn't believe her, that they would agree with her, perhaps, that Michael should be sent home. Like they don't have to believe that she was telling the truth to secretly agree with her that Michael or Kellen or someone should go.
Well, I mean, I think that was the essence of Kellen's argument, is that, yeah, she might have done this, but Michael is really who we should be getting rid of. Yeah. So, we can deal with her another time. Less likely to stick around than Michael.
Yeah. But I think, Desiree, saying, let's get to the vote. I think what was happening there is she knew what was going to happen, and it's like she didn't want to drag it out any further.
She just wanted to face it one way or the other. Like, there's nothing, no one was changing their mind. So get me out, or let's realize that Michael's going, and like, let me just move on.
Yeah. So like, they had the sneaky vote order where we get 4 votes for Desiree, and then Michael, and it's seeming they're acting like, oh, that was the fake out, was that you thought it was going to be Desiree, but now we're reading the votes in the order that may sound like it's Michael, but then, oh, wait, no, it's actually still Desiree. And, kudos for them for faking us out again after all this time of usually not necessarily like when it otherwise seems obvious. That it's surprising when they can make it seem unexpected for a little while. But yeah, so with Desiree voted out, I mean, my thought immediately after was like, well, good for her for trying to make a move, even though obviously it didn't work out and got her voted out. But, I respect that more than not making a move. But of course, it's also the flip side of that argument is like, could make a move later when it's safer, but sometimes that turns into never doing anything.
Well, and to her credit, like, this was when the numbers made sense.
Yeah. Like if Laurel had not been, if Laurel had been more open to this particular argument, and it was a reasonable argument, honestly. I wonder too. I wonder if it would have been any different if the plan had been to target Dom or Wendell instead of Kellen first. I wonder if that affected it at all. But then again, it was Dom that Laurel went to with the story.
Yeah.
So, maybe that was anyway. I think it was a reasonable possibility that Laurel would be open to this, and the fact that she wasn't something that could have been entirely predicted, and so that's ultimately what blew up the plan. Might have worked otherwise.
Right, and I think that's why I think Dez's plan was good. Like, because if you go, there's a lot of people that like Dom. Like Laurel obviously went to Dom. So while he could be a big target, that's a more risky. Wendell again, also very well liked.
Yeah,
and
also more idle possibility. I mean, I don't know if anyone's suspecting Wendell, but yeah,
on both of them. And so Kellen, less idle possibility. Her stock has been rising, and she's she's won one of the immunities, and like she's gaining confidence. Like, so you can tell she was kind of on the rise, and she was one of Dez's closest allies. So it makes a bigger stamp. So all of the things make sense from her perspective. And I don't know that like, if you choose Wendell or Dom, I think it just fizzles out because people are just like, well, there's a lot of idle stuff there.
Especially when voting out Michael as an alternative still makes a lot of sense.
Right. You can't come from the underdog position and go at Dom or Wendell when they likely have an idol somewhere between them, and there's strong players when you've also got Michael, like you said, as a strong player with a majority to go for. Yeah. That you're a part of that majority. Like, why would you just mix that up just to do it? So I think I really thought through a lot of it. I'm very impressed with how she came at this. It just, and we haven't discussed it too much. I don't believe that running to Dom and just telling him everything that happened was the best move for Laurel.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it.
Or other than like, I just don't know. I just don't see what that does for her.
Well, I think that it puts her in a position of being more trusted. Like, instead of being on the outside of that whole alliance, now she is taking Dez's spot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair way to present how she might have thought about it.
Well, I think Laurel is thinking about it in the context of who would I rather go to the end with. And she's saying, well, if I go with Dez's plan, that potentially puts me in a Final Four with that group. And maybe she's just thinking about that's not what she wants to do. So she's making the choice opposite of that. I mean, I'm not necessarily defending it as the right solution for her strategy, but I think that there's a case to be made for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm taking it in exactly that context. Like, it makes sense why she would think that way. I personally don't. I mean, I don't think Laurel's not going to win.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Not without something more than what we've seen so far. Yeah. I mean, I like her fine, but yeah, she needs to do more than we've seen so far. It's interesting that we've actually picked up a couple of live viewers. Hello, those of you who are watching. You've joined close to the end of our episode this week, I think. But welcome, nonetheless. But yeah, so I think that's about all the notes I have for this episode. Next time, we're going to get 2 people eliminated, and apparently lots of people lying to each other.
Such a big deal. 2 people eliminated. Oh my gosh.
No medical evacuations this season, so we got an extra person.
I mean, yeah, that's the way that it works.
Yep. Yeah, that's how it goes. So we'll see how that goes next week, and so we'll be back next week for more talking about Survivor.
More Survivor next week.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.